in the seminar today. It's myself, Rovini, and supported by our colleague Samalka. So let's jump into the topic because we have a lot of ground to cover and a lot of elements that we want to discuss with you and bring to your attention. As mentioned in the opening, so family business are a unique type of form of businesses. And so nobody can see me on, hopefully you can see me on video now. So because my video is on, so I don't know what's happening here. So view options. You're viewing parent screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see me. And on the next page here, so let me try to go through it. So there are, of course, you know, a family business is unique. Why it's unique? Because there's always a dominant owner at the core who has started the business or is continuing the business in succeeding generations. So what are the typical key strengths of family businesses then? Of course, they have usually strong culture and values, an entrepreneurial mindset, and therefore quite a substantial resilience. They have established power structures, which is typically with the owners of the business in first or succeeding generation. They have a commitment to social responsibilities because they are an important part of the local communities with long-standing relationship with key stakeholders and focus on a business community. If we go to the next slide, there are also some potential disadvantages or weaknesses attached to the concept of being a private or family business. So many have some problems to adapting quickly to new trends because the established business model is what you are usually used to. There's a certain probability that in a family business context where you have a very emotional ownership perspective and a lot of business issues where the conflict between owners means family members can appear because of unmanaged expectation, but we are coming to that in a few minutes. So there's also a likelihood to focus more on your strengths and to create blind spot in areas where you should spend more focus on what we call here on the slide weaknesses. So building on strengths is great, but also understand your weaknesses and your blind spot is of equally importance for the long term. So lower level of financial discipline. This do not apply necessarily to all family business, but can apply if you're mixing up too much private issues and family needs. And there's also a less likely to proactively plan for business continuity, as we see that especially in the first and second generation, founding entrepreneurs, of course, want to stay within their own business for as long as possible. Therefore, it's sometimes, not always, but potentially difficult to segregate family matters on the emotional side and the business matters on the business side. On the next page, we see then that it requires a holistic view. At PwC, we call that the owner's agenda, which you see here on the slide, which illustrate that there are two different areas. One related with the owners, which you can see here on the left-hand side, which start with is what bonds us together, what are our codified purpose and values, why we are together in business, and what we want to achieve together. There's a continuity part. Continuity includes how to raise the next generation in responsible roles and passing the business to the next generation. It's about wealth management, whether all of the family wealth should be invested in the business or whether there should be a separation, at least for parts of the private wealth, also from a risk perspective, to separate business and private matters and also private wealth accordingly. And then the government. The government is the interface between the owners and the business and the way how owners execute the influence on the business. And on the business side, you are, I guess, all pretty confident and familiar with the elements which are on the top of the mind of our clients today, from digital transformation, revenue growth, increasing profitability, manage talent, risk and regulation, and capital. And especially in COVID-19 times, there's a lot of focus on the right-hand side to secure and to protect your business. But is, according to my experience and my discussion with clients, is equally important to keep the shareholders on the same page, that they have a common and united views what's needed for the business, and have a common understanding that business needs comes first in the current crisis. So from here, we can move to the next slide then and see what does it mean. So that means that in a family business context, it's important to understand that there are different roles and responsibilities that should be clarified, and each of the different roles and positions you can have create obviously different responsibilities, different expectation. So John Davis, one of the famous academic professors based in Harvard, the US, has developed with his colleague this one, which you see is a so-called three-circle model. It illustrates the three different areas which are important for family business. The first circle represents a family. You are part of a family. You are born into a family, and you cannot escape usually from your family. So this is where also your emotional value and your emotional home is based. Then you have the company. In a family business context, you usually have a business, and then you have owners of the business. And in the first generation, the founding partner is also a member of a family and typically the owner of a business. But you can imagine in future generations to come, not every successors might want to have a role in the business or might be capable enough to run the business. He or she may have just a family shareholder position. You may want to have also other shareholders supporting the business, whether you go listed or accept minority shareholder. There might be non-family business shareholders. And in order to run your business successfully, it may require non-family professional management who are expert in the field of operation and in your particular industry. And each of the different areas, which are outlined here from 1 to 7, has different expectation on your business. And managing this expectation is of critical importance. Let's make an example. An external manager of your business wants to understand what is the role of the family, what is the shareholder, what is the role of the board. If these roles are not clear and family members interfering in the business, shareholders trying to make a business decision, or the role of the board is not clear, it's very difficult to find the right talented person running your business if the roles and responsibilities are not clear. The same is true for family members who want to enter the family business, and there are no rules in place which describe what kind of criteria should a family member fulfill to work in the business, or even get a management position, or qualify for shareholdings in the future. This is just to illustrate that it's a complex environment where, in general, these three elements of family, ownership, and company matters needs to be balanced and managed in a proper and professional way. And this don't have to end in very complex structure. It's just important that you understand these three different areas of influence and the respective expectation, which leads to certain roles and responsibilities. Moving forward, on the next slide, we see then, so we can build on this. The question is how to build resilience for your business. And this is what we see then here on the next slide. So that resilience, so some of the family firms currently has the potential to withstand the storm, others do not. Or even in some parts of the world, we observe currently that there are even family disputes are going on, which is obviously something which is not helpful and needed to be avoided. So, what means good governance? Was had the pandemic? What kind of effects do we currently observe on the Sri Lankan family business? Of course, number one is cash is king. So liquidity is something which should be on top of each family business. So a liquidity crunch may happen due to the bad economic condition, but also requires a certain financial discipline from the owners, spending the money or paying dividends. Operating in the informal sector has led to less access to capital. So a capital is not available in the amount that before the crisis, which brings also additional problems. Working from home proved to be challenging for many family business. A very few businesses were able to innovate during the crisis. Supply chain, due to over-reliances on the few parties, caused a problem in many cases, and also slow to access or quantify risk for the business model. What will be the lasting impact on the business model? And I think here are some risks, but also some opportunities for the Sri Lankan economies, as we see some very interesting trend towards more sustainability going forward, which you currently can also see in the global news by looking, just as an example, looking at BlackRock announcing as the biggest wealth manager on the planet that they want to spend much more focus on sustainable value chain, also across the international multi-conglomerates value chain, which has an impact on countries like Sri Lanka and other countries. So going forward then, so it's a question obviously on what can you as an entrepreneur, what should businesses do? I would like to focus on a couple of aspects here. One aspect is governance. So what does good governance mean then? So what is it good for? So governance in essence is not just an exercise of bureaucratic matters, it serves a certain purpose. And what is the purpose? And what does good governance really mean? It's a framework for navigating through family and business matters. It's an equally detailed framework for the business, which helps to clearly segregate roles of owners and the management, and it foster and introduce a strong financial discipline. Why it's important? It becomes even more important when the size of the business gets bigger. So it increases when the business gets bigger and more internationalized. And also we see that in some countries, in some family business, the business practices are not always state of the art, and the good governance and input from others, independent third parties, for example, from the board, help you to stay on track and to organize in your business in the way which is long-term sustainable. So it has a certain value to have a good governance in place. On the next page, we see that a good governance framework results in a couple of positive effects. Number one is that you are able to align the interest of stakeholders. Stakeholders are not just the shareholders, it's also the interest of your customer, of your suppliers, of your bank, of your local community. They all have an interest in your company, even if they are not shareholders. It leads to stronger legal compliance. It's a safeguarding the company assets. It supports the creation of trusted relationship, which ultimately leads to stronger brand equity and confidence in your company and the owners of the business, which is a necessity to attract and retain the best talent in working for your company or running your company. It also leads to a premium on the valuation of your company in the eyes of investors and makes transition from one generation to the next much easier. So on the next slide, we could see how the system works together and which parties are usually involved in the system. So on top is the owner, the founding owner or the owning family, of course, who gives empowerment to the board of directors, and the board of directors acts as guardians on behalf of the owners, but also direct and monitor the executive management. So that's a proper balance and good oversight of monitoring the execution of strategy and gives the right direction, including compensation and remuneration for executive management. In return, the executive management has to execute on the strategic planning that they have formulated and got approved by the board. So you see there's a lot of interaction between the executive management and the board. And if you want to be the board effective, you should have a person who has the right professional expertise in place to help the owners to raise the right questions, to make sure that the management gets the right level of support, but also is challenged to the right level to doing the right things and take the right strategic decision. The executive management, of course, is somebody who got the capital from the family and should produce sufficient returns on the investment. And in this picture, you can see it's very difficult and dangerous if you have family members working in the various positions, acting as owners, having a brother, sister in the executive management, and maybe an uncle or a friend of the family as a board of directors. Each of these different bodies, shareholder, board, and management, has a certain responsibility for the business, and mixing up private relationship with professional duties can always be risky, also when it comes to managing family and private relationships. So let's move on to what we would recommend as leading practices or good practices to navigate through that. We have, on the one hand side, something that we call the family constitution or family governance, family protocol. There are different terminologies for the same construct. In essence, it's focusing on the family side, less on the business, more on the family side of things, and put a structure around a couple of things and brings the family shareholders and family members on the same page to be united in their thinking, to understand their roles and responsibilities, and create a common vision for the future of the business and strong values for the family. So a family constitution then formalizes a conflict resolution process. You don't want to have any conflict on court and in public. It may end, with regard to my previous point in separating family wealth from the business, it may require a setup of a family office, but this is typically only relevant for families with a huge amount of wealth. But it also includes and formalize a plan or a training plan or a succession support plan for family members, how the family can support an individual to get the best possible education, learn about the business, and become ultimately either a responsible shareholder or a competent board member, or even a visionary leader of the family business in the future. Shareholder agreements can address and manage unexpected events, including potential exits of family members to avoid conflicts and disputes around company valuation if somebody wants to leave. Shareholder agreements are also very necessary to avoid potential conflicts when it comes to sell of the company shares to a third party, or shouldn't there be a right of first refusal for family members. It also supports good communication, as it includes a communication platform and keeps the communication channels between family members alive. And it's also a framework for reinvesting funds into the business versus using the business as a kind of a cash machine and extracting too much money out of the business so that the business may suffer. Managing expectation in terms of dividends. You see, it's all about managing expectation and clarifying roles and responsibilities. The same can happen for the business. So a good, strong business governance framework, which we see on the next next page, is also something of importance. And according to the previous slide where I explained the three different governance bodies, it creates also a strong, competent board of directors, so that it's not just family and friends. Of course, you want to have people that you can trust, but you want to have also a person who is qualified in your industry, or maybe also others who are challenging the conventional wisdom of your industry and coming from a different industry. It also creates a good communication platform. It fosters strong internal policy and compliance. It gives you an idea of an efficient risk management frameworks which fits with your goals and values as owners of the business. And last but not least, but very important in the current crisis, it helps you to create a good and effective reporting system, which allows you and enables you as an owner to make the right decision timely based on relevant and reliable information. So when it comes to the element of financial discipline is important for any business. Yeah, because financial discipline maintains record of financial transaction. It means to have a proper cash flow management. So unfortunately, especially for SMEs, we see quite often that the cash flow forecasting is not as good as it usually should be. And as cash is king, cash matters for the future and of the business and being able to react also in current crisis situation. We believe and we see that focus on cash management is of critical importance. Separation of personal cost and personal expenses for your private living and business needs and what you need for your business is of critical importance to really separate and distinguish between the two. And therefore also separating the personal accounts from the business accounts are important. Prepare budget and review them quite often. Understand the business cycle and formulate long-term growth strategies and set realistic growth plans. Strategy toward achieving it are critical element of a financial discipline. And as always, try to build cushions into your financial planning and make sure that you have always sufficient cash reserves to be able to react to current crisis. So let me give you an example how all of the above may work together. So it's one of our clients in Finland, which is a diversified family business conglomerate in third generation, which consists today of about 30 family business shareholders, next generation and current generation. So a couple of years back, they had the challenge that it was unclear which of the family members could qualify for a job in the business. There were diverging expectations towards how much dividends family members should get. It has also been argued and debated the compensation of the family CEO, whether he should get the same as a non-family executive in a similar position, less or even more. So many questions were open at that time. The composition of the board was also not ideal for the diversified group of businesses. And they spent a lot of time to going through a process which was insightful, but also quite painful for some individuals because there was a lot of learning involved in that, and defined a new governance framework for themselves. And they decided to bring all family shareholders on one page to establish a family council. And a family council was responsible to represent the interests of the family shareholders. Make sure that all shareholder and family related matters are only discussed in this circle amongst family members. Then the spokesperson from the family council, who has a clear objective and task to define the long-term strategy, so planning horizon 5 to 20 years for the business, and represent again the interest of the owners. They are involved and they appoint capable board members, and the board members have a different time horizon by supervising the executive management, signing off the strategic planning, and also acting as a mentor and coach for the executive management. So the board of directors composition has changed from family to dominantly non-family professionals, with a clear structure when it comes to term in office, compensation for the role, etc. Planning horizon 1 to 5 years. And the executive management, who was obviously responsible for driving the business without interference from the family. So they only were directly interacting with the board of directors. How has this helped in the current crisis for the business? Then automotive and dealership and electronics and so on, you can imagine the current crisis made a major hit on their business. Number one was that the family council were able to provide long-term commitment and were ready to inject additional family capital to the business as soon as it was needed. Because everybody was already on the same page, they could act quickly. The board also was very, very helpful, bringing different areas of expertise into the discussion and helps executive management to take strategic decisions very quickly. And this resolved then a lot of problem, which helps them to stay on track, to manage their workforce without layoffs in their business, and make sure that they are well prepared for the future. So all of the above would not have been easily possible if there were no governance in place and if the roles and expectation would not have been clear from the very beginning. So let me pause here and stop my presentation here. So I hope you get a first sense how important good governance and clearly articulated roles and defined responsibilities really are to manage emotional dynamic amongst family members and to bridge this with the expectation and the business need that should be fulfilled, also financially wise, to create a good future for your business. Back to you, David.
Thank you, Peter. That was a wonderful presentation to hear from you. Now, we're going to move into a discussion period, I guess, for the remainder of this session. I will be moderating for those of you who've joined us. My name is Dave Blackman. I'm an economist in the Resident Coordinator's Office here at the United Nations. And we have joining us, as well as Peter, we have Ravini and Samalka from the Sri Lankan office of PwC in the Family Business Advisory Services division. So thank you, Peter. That was a fantastic presentation. I think very much a learning experience for me too about the very unique governance structures that family businesses tend to exhibit, and I think there's a lot of value in policymakers understanding these unique challenges that they face, particularly as we enter the sort of period of uncertainty that we're facing at the moment.
Absolutely, and there is no too much bureaucracy required. As long as you're conscious about the different roles and responsibility, you can also find very pragmatic roles and regulations to make it clear for SMEs. You don't have to over-engineer stuff, but you need to understand the fundamentals.
Indeed, yeah. So please, for any of our participants, observants, please direct your questions to the chat box. I will try to moderate the discussion as much as possible, and I'll be putting the questions to Ravini and Samalka and Peter as they come through. So perhaps I might start with a couple as people warm up their fingers, so to speak. A question about our current situation. Of course, we're in what might be quite a protracted global recession at the moment. Have you, Peter and Ravini Samalka on the Sri Lankan side, have you seen a change in the types of services you are providing to your clients? Have you seen in the last few months, has there been more demand for certain services in your portfolio more than others?
Maybe I start with a broader view from other countries before then Ravini and Samalka can complement this with a Sri Lankan view. Yes, indeed, David. So maybe in a nutshell, so we see more demand in helping our private clients in cash flow forecasting and scenario planning, because the future is so uncertain and they are sometimes lacking with the right resources and experiences to build a solid cash flow forecast and financial planning. And they also appreciate our assessment of how things in a particular industry may most likely develop, because we have more insight than individuals. Second is that the big corporate clients have stopped or postponed their big consulting project, big IT SAP project and so on, whereas smaller private businesses are requesting more support in starting the digital transformation, because they found this is the future to become more effective and robust and resilient going forward. So I think these are, from my point of view, the most obvious observation. And of course, the M&A transaction businesses went down a little bit, but we expect to recover very soon. Ravini, Samalka. You are on mute,
I
Ravini.
think, let me also just touch on that. I think I echo everything that Peter said. We've also seen quite a bit of demand for restructuring the family businesses, the smaller companies like Peter mentioned. I think they're looking at digital transformation as well in Sri Lanka. So I think those are areas that we have also seen requests for assignments here. Ruvini?
Yes, to add on to what Samalka and Peter mentioned, I think we have seen a lot of family businesses and the larger ones as well as smaller ones coming to us with requests for uh, greater access to capital. So I think raising capital at this point has become an important consideration. A lot of Sri Lankan family businesses and many others as well traditionally rely on bank borrowings to expand their operations and increase the scale of operations. But now I think businesses are beginning to realize that there are alternative sources of capital available. So we have just seen the start of private equity funds coming up. We also have an SME board now for listing on the Colombo Stock Exchange. We also have several high net worth investors who are looking to take up stakes in promising companies. So there are many risk capital and equity investors who are available now to these successful family businesses, whom they can broaden their ownership structures and look at raising capital from not just the banking sector, but from many other sectors. So we've seen services like that come up where family businesses are looking for greater access to capital. There are also the more progressive ones are also looking outward because I think many of the mature businesses in Sri Lanka would have realized that the local market is limited. We are 20 million people. There's a whole lot of markets out there which are much larger than Sri Lanka. So those who have a viable product or a service to offer are obviously looking outwards. So you find the more progressive business houses are now looking and they come to PwC and other advisory firms and work with us to look at market access, accessing new markets. How can they form business partnerships? How can they form strategic alliances? How can they get access to new technology in order to do this, to become more globalized and link up to the global value chains and become a part of the global supply network.
If I may, David, just add to what Rovini is just explaining, I think it's very interesting what you're saying. So especially fundraising, finding new business partners. To my previous point, in my experience, you don't get access to additional funding. You don't find promising new business partners if you don't do your homework. And homework means having proper governance, having proper separation about business and private needs. If you use your own company like a cash machine, nobody will give you money. If your business model is not right, if your operating model is not right, nobody will invest in your company. Then you have a choice to exit your company and let others managing the turnaround and realize the value which may exist in your company. But if you want to realize your own value of your company, you have to do your homework right. And it starts with having clear roles, responsibility, a proper state-of-the-art business and operating model in place, responding to global trends as sustainability and so on, climate change and so on. Without that, it's very hard to find investors or business partners that your clients, Rovini, are looking for. Making your homework is key.
Yes.
Thanks, Rovini. Very comprehensive answer. I'm going to move to the floor, actually. So Avanti in our audience has a question on a slightly different topic, but she is in the process of starting a firm with her husband and wants to ask about having family members as directors. What are the risks associated with a firm where directors are solely family members, and are there any opportunities or benefits to that also?
Of course, there are always pros and cons. And if you're starting a business in the first place, so if you're a young entrepreneur, so then you are always limited in your ability and also in size of the business. So the obvious the obvious benefit of having a family member is that the family member in the board really represent also your interest. Usually you're working in the same direction. Nobody has a hidden agenda. This is one thing, but there's also a disadvantage because there is no additional insight or competence from the outside. Nobody will challenging you in the way they probably should. And if something is wrong in the personal relationship, this has an immediate impact on the business side. So if there is any kind of dispute between individuals in the family, it has an immediate downsize also when it comes to the director position. So there's always risky. I know that we see that often that in countries, in Mediterranean countries, in Middle East, also in South Africa, where you have a certain level of corruption in a country, that that family members really, or family business, want to rely more on family members because they believe they are the only person you can trust. Therefore, it may be a good advice than having a sufficient number of family members in the board, under one condition, as long as they are competent enough.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Samalka, Ravini, do you have thoughts on the issue?
I think Rovini and Samalka are both on mute.
Apologies. Yes. Yes. Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Nothing significant to add. I think what Peter mentioned is vitally important, and the need to have sort of your finances in place and your processes, systems, decision making in place as well. Other than that, I mean, looking outward and towards growth, I think it's also important for Sri Lankan businesses to start considering how they can go out of Sri Lanka. And also, if they're within Sri Lanka, I think there's a question here I can see on the screen on a tourism related business. I think it's important to also bring in the discussion of sustainability. And here we are not really talking about sustainability as in environmental compliance or something restricted to one area of sustainability, but we are really looking at the overall sustainability of the family business, and all these elements that we were talking about actually contribute to sustaining the family business in the long term. Having said that, I think the attention that has to be given to engaging in sustainable practices is another key area of focus for family businesses, because you're not operating alone. You are operating within a framework. So the laws and regulations of the country, the sustainability of the environment, the sustainability of the workforce that you work with. So there's a question, as I said, on tourism, and I think there the question of sustainability becomes very important, although it may be something not directly related to your business. The need to comply with good practices, sustainable practices when we are practicing, particularly in the tourism industry, conservation. I mean, the beaches in Sri Lanka are a very vital asset for our tourism industry. So maintaining the beaches, keeping them clean, waste disposal. We have seen so many instances of unsustainable practices happening. And it is all of our business finally to be concerned about that. Because if we are not compliant, and as businesses we are not compliant, finally we will not have a tourism product to sell. So even our wildlife parks, I think some of us may be engaged in things like wildlife safaris, for example, or running different types of wildlife experiences and running hotels in close proximity to wildlife parks. So again, the need for conservation, the need for management, managing numbers, not sort of overburdening the environment, all that becomes important for family businesses also to play a part in and play a role in that. Because finally, particularly in tourism, it's a natural resource finally that is attractive to our customer. So we have to preserve that resource in its optimum conditions, so that consciousness for the overall sustainability of what is around you as well as within your business are both important.
Excellent. So and I recognize that the question was in the panelist chat, not open for everybody, asking for the guest house. So my additional comment with that, if you're a small business in the tourism industry on the coastline of Sri Lanka, so you should have your USP, your unique selling proposition. You should be clear on what kind of customer you want to attract. Communicate, use the internet, use technology to make your brand and your USP really visible. And in these days, I think you're well advised, as Rovini said, to build on sustainability trends. Yeah, to be on the forefront of green tourism, sustainable green tourism. So this allows you to attract customers who are willing to pay a premium, which makes it easier for you to compete with the big value chains and the other hotel groups in Sri Lanka. Yeah, find your niche and be great in your niche, and communicate internationally. Internet, the sky's the limit.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ravini. Yes, when hearing the stories about the tourism sector in Sri Lanka, of course, is quite an area that is facing significant vulnerability at the moment, and that very much also links to UNDP's work in the area with the Sri Lankan Tourism Development Authority. I might change tack to a question on the floor from Azim. He perhaps maybe asking you to go into more detail in your presentation about succession planning. So Azim's referring to how to plan for the future of his manufacturing business, and particularly with regard to passing on ownership to future generations. How have you any advice on navigating that through the family unit, or particularly in the current context?
Usually, we have always two things that you want to achieve when passing the shares from one generation to the next, and obviously you made it already successfully in the third generation, which is a big achievement. I think, in my point of view, it's very important that the shareholders of the business are really staying together. But there might be a situation where shareholders have diverging interest. Therefore, there might be also a situation that some shareholders in the future may want to exit the family business. And therefore, there are a couple of things that you should do. Number one is you should have a shareholder agreement articulating what is our common interest, and the business comes first and personal dividends come second. Second element of the shareholder agreement should be that there are clear rules and provisions in place if somebody wants to exit, because this is always a source for conflict, because a leaving shareholder is asking for more money and sees a future brighter than continuing shareholders. Find a very easy, maybe multiple or whatever it is, a multiple EBIT solution that is very transparent and easy to calculate on which terms and conditions a shareholder can leave in future generation. We're calling this pruning the tree, and pruning the tree is very helpful and has been proven to be very successful for many family businesses in the past. And it's not a disaster if some family members want to exit the family business in the future, but it becomes a disaster if they cannot find a proper way with the remaining shareholders to find a way to agree on the company valuation and find a way how to pay the amount over a couple of years, which allows the business to continue to be successful. This would be my advice. Find proper shareholder agreement, make this happen, and discuss in the shareholder circle so that everybody moves in the same direction and has a consistent common understanding what shareholder responsibilities in your legacy really mean. Hope that answers.
Samalka, would you like to speak about the next gen coming into the business?
Yes, actually, I think to add to what Peter said, apart from having that shareholder agreement in place, I think it's really important to actually plan for the succession well in advance. So communication, I think, it's basically key. whether it's within the family or whether you want to communicate to the rest of the firm even. You need to plan for the succession. You need to understand whether some of the next gen want to come on board. Are there certain people who don't want to be a part of the business? Maybe you'll have certain next gen members who might want to only stay on as an owner. Maybe they wouldn't want to get involved in the business per se. So I think we have a slide on why succession planning also is really important. I think to actually ensure the continuity and development of the family business, and to even avoid disputes between heirs, or even if there is a dispute, you'll have a proper conflict resolution mechanism in place if a conflict arises. So these are key things that can be resolved if you have a proper succession plan in place.
Yeah, so let me build on this, Samarka, because we have one question here in the chat with regard to conflict resolution process. Maybe this is a good opportunity to answer that question as well. So conflicts can arise on various levels. You may want to have a different opinion on strategic decision, important decision in the business. So these should be made by the management, approved or supported by the board. So this is the first step on resolving conflict with regard to business issues. You should have a strong board in place, which is not just a marionette, but has real power to govern the business, which means also that the majority shareholder may pass part of his responsibility to the board. So the board should take a decision, not the biggest majority shareholder, that you have a decision taken by a forum, by a council, which consists of experts with expertise, so that any decision which is made for the business is not taken as a personal decision in pro or against an individual, but always a decision in the best interest of the business. When it comes to shareholder decision, for example, how much dividend should we pay? And the majority shareholder, who might be well enough, can exclude minority shareholder for a long time for getting any dividends, for example. This kind of conflict and personal ownership related conflict should be solved in a conflict resolution mechanism which is embedded in a family constitution, which means you should try to find a solution by using an external mediator or an external person. I don't think that it's always a good idea that the strongest, who has the majority of shares, will always take the final decision. Even the strongest may fail in their decision making, and having the majority of shares does not necessarily mean to take the wisest decision. So therefore you want to have a kind of mechanism here so that it doesn't escalate. Is it also in the interest of the majority shareholder? Yes, it is, even if he or she doesn't see it in the first place, because the reputation of the company is dependent on their ability to stay out of trouble, to compromise and find solution with the other shareholders. And you will never find access to additional capital. You will never find the business partners you want to if you don't prove that you are able to adhere to good governance. And this is one aspect. So therefore, I would really, in your situation, Avanti, suggest to find solution in terms of proper family governance and having a strong independent board.
Thank you, Peter. Now, perhaps building on the topic of conflict resolution, well, hopefully without conflict, but a question from the floor, I think the name escapes me at the moment, but asking about the process of welcoming management from outside of the family unit into what might previously have been a family-owned business. What sort of advice, Peter, in the European context, and Ravini Samalka in the Sri Lankan context, what sort of advice do you give your clients when they come with those sorts of transition arrangements and seek your advice?
It's a very good question. So number one observation is, in Europe, we see that typically from second to third generation, and as the business is growing, there's a stronger demand and stronger state-of-the-art more broadly accepted way of transitioning to the next generation is to separate ownership from management. So you see in Europe very often that starting at the latest and third generation, it's really bringing the best external professional management on board and not just continuing within the family. Why? Avoiding conflicts and also trying to make sure that you have the best expertise on board, not the most vocal shareholder. So this is broadly accepted. How to find the right person to do that? There are two things. One is having a well-structured assessment process and onboarding process. We distinguish between what you should do before, during, and after the hiring process. Before the hiring process, you should really make your homework. Coming back to my previous statement, having proper governance in place that the non-family external professional knows what he is signing up for. Otherwise, you don't get a proper and a good person if you don't know what he or she is signing up for. Second is make the decision not only within the family, allow to have an assessment center using also the board or other third parties to help you to evaluate the professional expertise, but of equally importance also the people skills, the emotional talent, leading other people, which is very helpful. And third, so you should allow whatever externals coming to a family business to allow a proper onboarding period, not throwing him immediately into cold water. Make sure that he really understands the core values of the family, the context, also the culture in your business to succeed in his new role. So these would be my advice from a global perspective. Over to you, Samarka and Rovini.
So just to bring in a flavor from Sri Lanka, I feel like there might be a slight difference in how family businesses function here. I think there might be a little sort of resistance from the family to actually bring on board the outside management. But of course, like you said, I think it's really important that you have that expert panel on board. You should have the business experts on board as well, but there is a bit of resistance. I think handing over, there's maybe less trust in the family independent members. So I think we Sri Lankan companies still have to take a bit of, I think they need to take on board a bit of the steps that we've been talking about now to get on board with the rest of the world.
It's about trust, right? It's about who can you trust. To my previous statement, yeah, who can you trust? So I think it's okay also to have a strong and well-educated family members leading the business or the board. This is for sure. But my good advice or my best advice would be focus on competence in the first place. And with the compensation, so how you structure incentive system and compensation, this is another important aspect, which goes beyond our topic today, but you can imagine in the typical principal agent conflict, you can find measures who incentivize the management to contribute to the long-term value generation or value creation of the business instead of short-term profit. And this is what you want.
Brilliant. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Samarka. Now, I apologize for some of the questions that are still coming through in the chat box. I think in the interest of time, I noticed that we perhaps didn't cover one of our issues to talk about as much as we would have liked. So, Rovini, now, do you have a question about, or a point to make about firms approaching the export market?
Yes, David, I'll just take a minute on that. But before that, maybe if I could just add on my comment to what Peter was speaking on and Samarka earlier on bringing in professional management. I think one of the other key things that Sri Lankan businesses really need to figure out is often these family businesses have had very powerful personalities, strong personalities who have obviously built up the family business to the level where it is currently. So when you bring in outside talent and professionals, the decision-making distinctions, I think that's very critical because, when you obviously bring in those people, they also need to have some discretion to shape the business and to structure the business in a certain way. So they too, as professionals, need to contribute. So how do you balance between traditionally the family who used to make all the decisions and the professionals who now are being sought out to bring in further decision-making skills, new thinking into the company. So that decision-making dynamics has to be looked at. And just one quick point to make on export orientation. I think there were a couple of questions on particular handmade products and air ticketing. I wouldn't try to go into industries, but I would try to say whatever the products or services that we provide. As Sri Lanka being a small market, we need to start looking at how does my product look globally? You know, can I make it an international product or an international service? What do I need to do to take it to the global market? Because eventually, I mean, Sri Lanka being a limited scope, all of us who are ambitious to grow need to look outward. So in being export oriented, in being outward oriented and linking to international value chains, I think these factors we put down probably become important. We've spoken of many of these things, but maybe if I just take international accreditations, so that might be one area where businesses really need to start planning ahead and investing. So if I saw that we have many participants from the agriculture sector. So if we are looking at processed food or fresh food going out into the international markets, then what are the kinds of accreditations that we need to have? We need to look at food safety, tracking traceability, having certifications for, guaranteeing the freshness and the quality of the produce that you send out. There are a few successful companies in Sri Lanka who are organically certified, certified for organic products. So they have obtained the necessary certifications and they've got the international accreditation. So that helps you to take your value of your agricultural business to a new level, right? And there is a huge value creation if you can work on niches like that, which can add value. Similarly, going back to tourism as an industry, again, getting the necessary certifications, the sustainability certifications, the green certifications, for example, you would appeal to a different class of tourists, a different group of tourists who are very conscious about those things. So I just wanted to make that point that we need to think a little more globally and outwardly and see how we can compete in the international market.
Yeah, and I think so. I believe strongly that this trend towards more sustainability, responsibility, climate change, and etc., will be of critical importance to become relevant on an international market scale. You can see that in the green agenda of the European Union. As I mentioned earlier, BlackRock is the biggest investor worldwide, is just launched a statement that they believe that any business who do not focus on sustainability, climate change, and fair working condition will go out of business in the next 10 years because they do not renew their license to operate anymore. And I think the current crisis is an accelerator of trends. This is what we see in many markets. It also causes some new problems, of course, but it puts the finger and points in the direction of what was wrong before, and is like a laser lens and is accelerating the speed of change. This is effectively what's currently happening: accelerated speed of change. And you'll never be too big to fail, but you can be too slow to fail. And I think this is the benefit of being slower in a country which is emerging, like Sri Lanka. You can be on the forefront of a new trend. This requires also, of course, conscious and serious discussion with the government. So what kind of support structure and measures is the government able to put in place to support you on the journey? But I see the future of a country like Sri Lanka with all the great talent, with all the beauty of your country, but also with the opportunities really in a more sustainable future business models.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ravini. Perhaps that might be a pleasant segue when we discuss about the need for an open economy going forward. Then we're nearing the end of our session now, but a reminder for those of us observing that next week, our topic of discussion is with the International Trade Centre, actually, looking at firms who are looking to export in the services sector. So a reminder that we will be back next Friday, the 24th at 2 p.m. So please do join us for that. I think it's there is an interesting convergence, isn't there, in the themes of what we're discussing here, that as a country like Sri Lanka that for all intents and purposes has been very resilient in the midst of the challenges we find ourselves in. I think there's an opportunity in a vastly reorganized world economy to make the best use for the firms that are here. Now, Peter, Samalka, Ravini, are there any concluding thoughts you have or advice for those of us on the line here, the family-owned businesses?
I think you have a great future, at least a potential for a great future. Take advantage of it. The time is now. Don't forget to involve the next generation, and I believe really now you have to act and get your affairs in order, put some relevant structure, do your homework, and then I wish you all the best, and we are ready to support you on the journey.
Along the same lines, I think I have some advice in terms of succession planning. I think, like I said earlier, communication comes first. You need to figure out if your next gen is actually passionate about the business. Do they want to get involved? And if they are, then you need to do a skills gap assessment and then plan for that. Maybe invest in education and upskilling of the next generation. Give them opportunity to sort of get the experience that they want. So that they can take over the business and successfully run it like you have.
Yeah, just one more thought to add to what everyone has been saying, which is to really see. I mean, I think as a country, we are at a very opportune moment now. We had a civil conflict. We had a lot of issues within the country, which really didn't help us to live up to our full potential. Now it's 2020, and we are facing a global crisis. But we've come a long way, and it's 10 years since the conflict ended, and it's really time for us to. We've been so resilient as Sri Lankans, right? We faced up to all this, and now we are tackling COVID also reasonably okay for the moment. Country is sort of getting back to normal gradually. So it's really time for us to look at what we as Sri Lanka can do. And our SMEs are a really important part of our economy. Everybody has realized that they account for a very large segment of economic activity. So in that context, I think it's really time for the ambitious ones to look outward and look at what new businesses and value-added businesses that they can do. So what we've been talking about hopefully would be of use to everyone as they gear themselves for a new decade starting this year.
Thank you, Ravini. On that lovely message, thank you, and Samalka and Peter for giving us your time and your expertise. I hope the other attendees here also were able to take away some important advice from the session. So thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations and UNDP, and we hope you have a good morning, Peter, and afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me and inviting me. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.